Right. I think we're going to go ahead and get started. It's 4 o'clock. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for a learning and growing webinar, Mastering Thinking Fast and Slow, Applying Principles to Enhance Learning. Our presenter today is Drew Denbaum of Houstonic Community College. My name is Kelsey, and I am your moderator today for Hawks Learning. We will have a live Q&A session after the presentation, so please enter any questions into the Q&A as we go. And I will now hand it over to our presenter.
Hi, I see that this was billed as Mastering Thinking Fast and Slow, which I don't think we can have that perhaps as our goal, but we can certainly begin the process. This is meant as an overview and an introduction to this great work by Daniel Kahneman, and I just wanted to start us off with that thought. The learning objective. The goal of this presentation is to help you gain insight into the principles of thinking fast and slow and begin to work on ways to incorporate these ideas into your life and lesson plans. My central goal as a teacher is to help students improve their higher order critical thinking skills. Now, this isn't easy. Most students, even those in honors and AP classes, have been trained all their lives to focus more on acquiring knowledge than thinking deeply and making personal connections to what they learn, and usually quickly forget. Most people continue to follow this pattern of behavior throughout their lives. Why? Why is that? Why don't we spend more time learning about how we think and exploring ways to get better at it? This presentation is an attempt to do just that, starting by recognizing and appreciating the fact that we actually have two different systems of thinking. I want you all to glance at this image. Your experience as you look at the woman's face seamlessly combines seeing and intuition. This is an example of fast thinking. As surely and quickly as you saw that the young woman's hair is dark, you knew she is angry. Furthermore, what you saw extended into the future. You sensed that this woman is about to say some very unkind words, probably in a loud and strident voice. A premonition of what she was going to do next came to mind automatically and effortlessly. You did not intend to assess her mood or to anticipate what she might do, and your reaction to the picture did not have the feel of something you did. It just happened to you. It was an instance of fast thinking. Now, look at the following problem. 17 times 24 equals. You knew immediately that this is a multiplication problem and probably knew that you could solve it with paper and pencil, if not without. You also had some vague intuitive knowledge of the range of possible results. You would be quick to recognize that both 12,609 and 123 are implausible. Without spending some time on the problem, however, you would not be certain that the answer is not 568. A precise solution did not come to mind, and you felt that you could choose whether or not to engage in the computation. If you have not done so yet, you should attempt the multiplication problem now, completing at least part of it in your head. I'll give you a moment. You experienced slow thinking as you proceeded through a sequence of steps. You first retrieved from memory the cognitive program for multiplication that you learned in school. Then you implemented it. Carrying out the computation was a strain. You felt the burden of keeping track of where you were and of where you were going while holding on to the intermediate result. The process was mental work, deliberate, effortful, and orderly, a prototype of slow thinking. The computation was not only an event in your mind, your body was also involved. Your muscles tensed up, your blood pressure rose, and your heart rate increased. Someone looking closely at your eyes while you tackled this problem would have seen your pupils dilate. Your pupils contracted back to normal size as soon as you ended your work, when you found the answer, which is 408, by the way, or when you gave up. When you think, your mind uses two cognitive systems. They don't exist physically in your brain. They are ways your brain functions. System one works easily and automatically and doesn't take much effort. It makes quick judgments based on familiar patterns. System two takes more effort. It requires intense focus and operates methodically. These two systems interact continually, but not always smoothly. Anytime you have to make sense of something, your mind applies two systems to the question at hand. The first is system one, or the mental processing that reads emotions and handles your automatic skills, like driving your car or adding 2 + 2. System one takes over your thinking when you comprehend simple statements, instinctively turn to see where a noise is coming from, or grimace when you see a gruesome image. System one supplies associated meanings, including stereotypes, rapidly and involuntarily. By contrast, you use system two when you're focusing on specific details like counting or figuring out how to answer an open-ended test question. System two applies effort consciously, such as when you do complicated math, try new physical activities, or search for a specific person in a crowd. System two thinking is slower, but you need it for methodical thinking processes such as formal logic. Human beings tend to value the measured system two while dismissing the mechanical system one, but reality is much more complicated. These mental processes engage in a division of labor when it comes to thinking, and they constantly interact. You usually live in system one's world, where its fast processing is extremely efficient. In fact, you can be reasoning about a task in system two, get tired or distracted, and find that you've shifted over to system one without realizing it. If you've ever puzzled over an optical illusion, you've experienced what happens when these two systems work at cross purposes. This is the famous Mueller Lie Illusion. I don't know if you've ever seen this before, but it's fascinating. As you can easily confirm by measuring them with a ruler, the horizontal lines are, in fact, identical in length. Now you, your system two, the conscious being you call I, have a new belief. You know that the lines are equally long. I just told you so. If asked about their length, you will say what you know, but, and this is so fascinating to me, you still see the bottom line as longer. At least I do. You have chosen to believe the measurement, but you cannot prevent system one from doing its thing. You cannot decide to see the lines as equal, although you know they are. To resist the illusion, there's only one thing you can do. You must learn to mistrust your impressions of the length of lines when fins are attached to them. To implement that rule, you must be able to recognize the illusory pattern and recall what you know about it. If you can do this, you will never again be fooled by the Mueller Lie Illusion. But you will still see one line as longer than the other. And I guess you can all imagine now how this can be generalized, how you can associate this same conundrum to many life experiences. Now, because System 1 operates automatically and cannot be turned off at will, errors of intuitive thought are often difficult to prevent. Biases cannot always be avoided because System 2 may have no clue to the error. Even when cues to likely errors are available, errors can be prevented only by the enhanced monitoring and effortful activity of System 2. As a way to live your life, however, continuous vigilance is not necessarily good, and it is certainly impractical. Constantly questioning our own thinking would be impossibly tedious, and System 2 is much too slow and inefficient to serve as a substitute for System 1 in making routine decisions. The best we can do is a compromise. That is, learn to recognize situations in which mistakes are likely and try harder to avoid significant errors when the stakes are high. System 1 likes to jump on the straightforward answer. So if a seemingly correct solution quickly appears when you face a challenge, System 1 will default to that answer and cling to it, even if later information proves it wrong. System 1 performs what's called rapid associative activation. If you have recently seen or heard the word eat, for example, you are temporarily more likely to complete the word fragment SO-P as soup than as soap. And the opposite would happen, of course, if you had just seen the word wash. We call this a priming effect and say that the idea of eat primes the idea of soup and that wash primes soap. This demonstration of a priming effect was conducted in an office kitchen at a British university. And you may have experienced things like this in your own life. For many years, members of that office had paid for the tea or coffee to which they helped themselves during the day by dropping money into an honesty box. A list of suggested prices was posted. One day, a banner poster was displayed just above the price list with no warning or explanation. For a period of 10 weeks, a new image was presented each week, either flowers or eyes in this banner overhead that appeared to be looking directly at the observer. No one commented on the new decorations, but the contributions to the honesty box changed significantly. Look at this. Eye weeks versus flower weeks. On average, the users of the kitchen contributed almost 3 times as much in eye weeks as they did in flower weeks. Evidently, a purely symbolic reminder of being watched prodded people into improved behavior. As we expect at this point, the effect occurs without any awareness. System 2 is not involved. Some years ago, the psychologist Timothy Wilson wrote a book with the evocative title, Strangers to Ourselves. You have now been introduced to that stranger in you, which may be in control of much of what you do, although you rarely have a glimpse of it. System 1 provides the impressions that often turn into your beliefs and is the source of the impulses that often become your choices and your actions. It offers an interpretation of what happens to you and around you, linking the present with the past and with expectations about the future. It contains the model of the world that instantly evaluates events as normal or surprising. It is the source of your rapid and often precise intuitive judgments. And it does most of this without your conscious awareness of its activities. System 1 is also the origin of many of the systematic errors in your intuitions. Now, part of this is what's called cognitive ease. Whenever you are conscious, and perhaps even when you are not, multiple computations are going on in your brain which maintain and update current answers to some key questions. Is anything new going on? Is there a threat? Are things going well? Should my attention be redirected? Is more effort needed for this task? You can think of a cockpit with a set of dials that indicate the current values of each of these essential variables. The assessments are carried out automatically by System 1, and one of their functions is to determine whether extra effort is required from System 2. One of these dials measures cognitive ease, and this is somewhat counterintuitive. Its range is between easy and strained. Easy is a sign that things are going well. There are no threats, no major news, no need to redirect attention or mobilize effort. Strained indicates that a problem exists, which will require increased mobilization of System 2. Then you experience cognitive strain. Cognitive strain is affected by both the current level of effort and the presence of unmet demands. So here is a chart for you to see what goes into cognitive ease: repeated experience, clear display, primed idea, good mood. You're feeling things are going well. It feels familiar. It feels true. It feels good. It feels effortless. When you are in a state of cognitive ease, you're probably in a good mood. Like what you see, believe what you hear, trust your intuitions, and feel that the current situation is comfortably familiar. You're also likely to be relatively casual and superficial in your thinking. When you feel strained, you're more likely to be vigilant and suspicious, invest more effort in what you're doing, feel less comfortable, and make fewer errors. But you also are less intuitive and less creative than usual. Silently read the following 2 quick questions, and I want you to write down your answers as quickly as possible. Okay, I hope you've all written down your answer. Okay, remember, you're just doing this quickly. Did you experience cognitive ease or cognitive strain when answering these questions? Did your answers come from System 1 or System 2? Were they in conflict? Well, your answer's correct. The correct answers were 5 minutes and 47 days. Now analyze your responses with system 2. Do you get it? Do you understand why the right answers are 5 minutes and 47 days? I'll give you a moment. Around 1960, a young psychologist named Sarnoff Mednick thought he had identified the essence of creativity. His idea was as simple as it was powerful. Creativity is associative memory that works exceptionally well. He made up a test called the remote association test, which is still often used in studies of creativity. For an example, consider the following 3 words: cottage, Swiss, cake. Can you think of a word that is associated with all 3? It's pretty easy. Comes right to mind. But now try this: dive, light, rocket. This problem is much harder, but it has an answer, and you can even come up with a different one, that every speaker of English recognizes, although less than 20% of a sample of students found it within 15 seconds. I'll give you a little bit longer to see if you can come up with something. It isn't easy. The answer is sky. Skydive, skylight, skyrocket. You were using system 2 there. For many people, the subconscious signal from system 1 transmits a sense of cognitive ease or intuition about a word triad, even if no answer ever comes to mind. Your mood plays a role in this process too. A happy mood loosens the control of system 2 over performance. When in a good mood, people become more intuitive and more creative, but also less vigilant and more prone to logical errors. A bad mood indicates that things are not going very well. There may be a threat, and vigilance is required. Neglect of ambiguity and suppression of doubt. Let's see what I mean. Jumping to conclusions is efficient if the conclusions are likely to be correct, the costs of an occasional mistake acceptable, and if the jump saves much time and effort. Jumping to conclusions is risky when the situation is unfamiliar, the stakes are high, and there's no time to collect more information. These are the circumstances in which intuitive errors are probable, which may be prevented by a deliberate intervention of system 2. System 1 is gullible and biased to believe. System 2 is in charge of doubting and unbelieving. But system 2 is sometimes busy, and this is key, system 2 is often lazy. We see this in classrooms every day. Indeed, there is evidence that people are more likely to be influenced by empty, persuasive messages, such as commercials, when they are tired and depleted. Related to this is exaggerated emotional coherence, a halo effect. The tendency to like or dislike everything about a person, including things you have not observed, is known as the halo effect. And man, this is certainly evident in politics every day, but in many other areas as well. This is a common bias that plays a large role in shaping our view of people and situations. It is one of the ways the representation of the world that System 1 generates is simpler and more coherent than the real thing. I'm going to give you an example here. What do you think of Alan and Ben? Alan is intelligent, industrious, impulsive, critical, stubborn, envious. Ben is envious, stubborn, critical, impulsive, industrious, intelligent. If you're like most of us, you viewed Alan much more favorably than Ben. The initial traits in the list change the very meaning of the traits that appear later. The stubbornness of an intelligent person is seen as likely to be justified and may actually evoke respect. But intelligence in an envious and stubborn person makes him more dangerous. The halo effect is also an example of suppressed ambiguity. The adjective stubborn is ambiguous and will be interpreted in a way that makes it coherent with the context. To derive the most useful information from multiple sources of evidence, you should always try to make these sources independent of each other. This rule is part of good police procedure. When there are multiple witnesses to an event, they're not allowed to discuss it before giving their testimony. The goal is not only to prevent collusion by hostile witnesses, it's also to prevent unbiased witnesses from influencing each other. Witnesses who exchange their experiences will tend to make similar errors in their testimony, reducing the total value of the information they provide. And this leads us to a very, very key element of thinking fast and slow, and that is what you see is all there is. And it's abbreviated WYSIATI. An essential design feature of the associative machine is that it represents only activated ideas. Information that is not retrieved, even unconsciously, from memory might as well not exist. System 1 excels at constructing the best possible story that incorporates ideas currently activated, but it cannot allow for information it does not have. When information is scarce, which is a common occurrence, System 1 operates as a machine for jumping to conclusions. The combination of a coherence-seeking System 1 with a lazy System 2 implies that System 2 will endorse many intuitive beliefs, which closely reflect the impressions generated by System 1. Of course, System 2 is also capable of a more systematic and careful approach to evidence, but System 1 influences even the more careful decisions. Its input never ceases, which is why we have to be vigilant when it's important. System 1 has been shaped by evolution to provide a continuous assessment of the main problems that an organism must solve to survive. How are things going? Is there a threat or a major opportunity? Is everything normal? Should I approach or avoid? The questions are perhaps less urgent for a human in a city environment than for a gazelle on the savannah, but we have inherited the neural mechanisms that evolved to provide ongoing assessments of threat level, and they have not been turned off. Situations are constantly evaluated as good or bad, requiring escape or permitting approach. Good mood and cognitive ease are the human equivalents of assessments of safety and familiarity. Now on to another item, substituting questions. A remarkable aspect of your mental life is that you are rarely stumped. True, you occasionally face a question such as 17 times 24, to which no answer comes immediately to mind for most of us. But these dumbfounded moments are rare. The normal state of your mind is that you have intuitive feelings and opinions about almost everything that comes your way. This is how we generate intuitive opinions on complex matters. If a satisfactory answer to a hard question is not found quickly, System 1 finds a related question that is easier and will answer it. Answering one question in place of another is called substitution. Instead of answering the target question, the heuristic question is the simpler question you answer instead. In psychology, heuristics are simple, efficient rules which people often use to form judgments and make decisions. They are mental shortcuts that usually involve focusing on one aspect of a complex problem and just ignoring the others. The automatic processes of System 1 often make available one or more answers to easy questions that could be mapped onto the target question. On some occasions, substitution will occur and a heuristic answer will be endorsed by System 2. Of course, System 2 has the opportunity to reject this intuitive answer or to modify it by incorporating other information. However, a lazy System 2 often follows the path of least effort and endorses a heuristic answer without much scrutiny of whether it is truly appropriate. You will not be stumped. You'll not have to work very hard, and you may not even notice that you did not answer the question you were asked. Furthermore, you may not realize that the target question was difficult because an intuitive answer to it came readily to mind. Now, take a look at this image. Is the man on the right larger than the man on the left? The corridor in which the figures are seen is drawn in perspective and appears to go into the depth plane. Your perceptual system automatically interprets the picture as a three-dimensional scene, not as an image printed on a flat surface. Let me just show it to you again. It just happens. You can't help that. In the 3D interpretation, the person on the right is both much farther away and much larger than the person on the left. For most of us, this impression of 3D size is overwhelming. Only visual artists and experienced photographers have developed the skill of seeing the drawing as a two-dimensional object. For the rest of us, substitution occurs. The dominant impression of 3D size dictates the judgment of 2D size. The illusion is due to a 3D heuristic. Oops, I just wanted to show it to you again. This is very much like the Mueller Lie illusion. It's really hard to recognize that they're all three the same size. The essential, let me see here. Oops, go back. Just have to see this better. sorry. The substitution of three-dimensional for two-dimensional size occurs automatically. The picture contains cues that suggest a 3D interpretation. These cues are irrelevant to the task at hand, the judgment of size of the figures, and you should have ignored them, but you could not. The bias associated with the heuristic is that objects that appear to be more distant also appear to be larger. As this example illustrates, a judgment that is based on substitution will inevitably be biased in predictable ways. In this case, it happens so deep in the perceptual system that you simply cannot help it. Here's another example. The exaggerated faith in small samples is only one example of a more general illusion. We pay more attention to the content of messages than to information about their reliability, and as a result, end up with a view of the world around us that is simpler and more coherent than the data justify. Many facts of the world are due to chance, including accidents of sampling. Causal explanations of chance events are inevitably wrong. Here's another key element: anchoring. If you are asked whether Gandhi was more than 144 years old when he died, you will end up with a much higher estimate of his age at death than you would if the anchoring question made no reference to age. There's a form of anchoring that occurs in a deliberate process of adjustment, an operation of system 2. And there is anchoring that occurs by a priming effect, which is an automatic manifestation of system 1. So, how old do you think Gandhi was when he died? Did you produce your guess by adjusting down from 144? Probably not. But the absurdly high number still affected your estimate, at least subconsciously. Suggestion is a priming effect, which selectively evokes compatible evidence. You did not believe for a moment that Gandhi lived for 144 years, but your associative machinery surely generated an impression of a very ancient person. System 1 understands sentences by trying to make them true. And the selective activation of compatible thoughts produces a family of systematic errors that make us gullible and prone to believe too strongly whatever we believe. Related is predicting by what's called representativeness. Representativeness is similarity to a preconception or stereotype. The false statement that Elvis Presley's parents wanted him to be a dentist is mildly funny because the discrepancy between the images of Presley and a dentist is detected automatically. System 1 generates an impression of similarity without intending to do so. Judging probability by representativeness has important virtues. The intuitive impressions that it produces are often, indeed usually, more accurate than chance guesses would be. On most occasions, people who act friendly are in fact friendly. A professional athlete who's very tall and thin is much more likely to play basketball than football. People with a PhD are more likely to subscribe to the New York Times than people who ended their education after high school. Young men are more likely than elderly women to drive aggressively. In all these cases, and in many others, there is some truth to the stereotypes that govern judgments of representativeness, and predictions that follow this heuristic may be accurate. In other situations, the stereotypes are false, and the representativeness heuristic will mislead, especially if it causes people to neglect base rate information that points in another direction. Even when the heuristic has some validity, exclusive reliance on it is associated with grave sins against statistical logic. Take this example. You see a person reading the New York Times on the New York subway. Which of the following is a better bet about the reading stranger? She has a PhD. She does not have a college degree. You get a system 1 answer. Representativeness would tell you to bet on the PhD, but this is not necessarily wise. You should seriously consider the second alternative because many more non-graduates than PhDs ride in New York subways. We're just looking at this from a statistical standpoint now. And if you must guess whether a woman who is described as a shy poetry lover studies Chinese literature or business administration, you should opt for the latter option. Even if every female student of Chinese literature is shy and loves poetry, which is certainly not true, it is also certain that there are more bashful poetry lovers in the much larger population of business students. Another problem with representativeness can be insensitivity to the quality of evidence. Recall the rule of system 1, what you see is all there is. Now, we all have two selves. The experiencing self is the one that answers the question, does it hurt now? The remembering self is the one that answers the question, how was it on the whole? Memories are all we get to keep from our experience of living. And the only perspective that we can adopt as we think about our lives is therefore that of the remembering self. Confusing experience with the memory of it is a compelling cognitive illusion. And it is this substitution that makes us believe, for instance, that a blissful past experience was entirely ruined by a painful ending. The remembering self can be wrong, but it is the one that keeps score and governs what we learn from living. And it is the one that makes decisions. What we learn from the past is to maximize the qualities of our future memories, not necessarily of our future experience. This is the tyranny of the remembering self. Innumerable studies show that an inconsistency is built into the design of our minds. We have strong preferences about the duration of our experience of pain and pleasure. We want pain to be brief and pleasure to last. But our memory has evolved to give the most weight to the most intense moment of an episode of pain or pleasure, the peak, and when the episode was at its end. A memory that neglects duration will not serve our preference for long pleasure and short pains. A thought experiment about your next vacation will allow you to observe your attitude to your experiencing self. At the end of the vacation, all pictures and videos will be destroyed. Furthermore, you will swallow a potion that will wipe out all your memories of the vacation. Now, how would this prospect affect your vacation plans? How much would you be willing to pay for it relative to a normally memorable vacation? For many people, the elimination of memories greatly reduces the value of the experience. Study respondents often say they would not bother to go at all. We began this presentation with a description of the intuitive system 1, which does the fast thinking, and the effortful and slower system 2, which does the slow thinking. Monitor system 1 and maintains control as best it can within its limited resources. Our minds work in an uneasy interaction between the automatic system 1 and the effortful system 2. System 2 is who we think we are. System 2 articulates judgments and makes choices, but it often endorses or rationalizes ideas and feelings that were generated by System 1. System 1 registers the cognitive ease with which it processes information, but it does not generate a warning signal when it becomes unreliable. Intuitive answers come to mind quickly and confidently, whether they originate from skills or from heuristics. There's no simple way for System 2 to distinguish between a skilled and a heuristic response. Its only recourse is to slow down and attempt to construct an answer on its own, which it's reluctant to do because it is lazy. Many suggestions of System 1 are casually endorsed with minimal checking. This is how System 1 acquires its bad reputation as a source of errors and biases. Its operative features, which include what you see is all there is and associative coherence, give rise to predictable biases and to cognitive illusions like anchoring and overconfidence. So what can we do about this? How can we improve judgments and decisions, both our own and those of the institutions that we serve and that serve us? The short answer is that little can be achieved without considerable effort. The way to block errors that originate in System 1 is simple in principle. Recognize the signs that you're in a cognitive minefield, slow down, and ask for reinforcement from System 2. This is how you will proceed when you next encounter the Mueller Lie Illusion. When you see lines with fins pointing in different directions, you will recognize the situation as one in which you should not trust your impressions of length. Unfortunately, the sensible procedure is least likely to be applied when you need it most. We'd all like to have a warning bell that rings loudly whenever we are about to make a serious error, but no such bell is available. And cognitive illusions are generally more difficult to recognize than perceptual illusions. The voice of reason may be much fainter than the loud and clear voice of an erroneous intuition. And questioning your intuitions is unpleasant when you face the stress of a big decision. Ultimately, a richer language is essential to improve decision-making. Much like medicine, the identification of judgment errors is a diagnostic task, which requires a precise vocabulary. Labels such as anchoring effects and cognitive ease bring together in memory everything we know about a bias, its causes, its effects, and what can be done about it. So how can we incorporate these ideas into our lives and in our teaching? To get things started, here are a few ideas I can offer as an English teacher. For example, Hamlet. At the heart of the play's dramatic conflict is the cognitive ease of Hamlet's instinct for revenge versus the cognitive strain of his doubt and confusion. In Hamlet, the ghost of Hamlet's father exemplifies the clash between the judging and decision-making remembering self. The ghost actually says to him, "Remember me," versus Hamlet's experiencing self, uncertainty and indecision. About representativeness and the halo effect. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the short story, A Good Man is Hard to Find by Flannery O'Connor, but in it, the grandmother sees this character, the misfit, as a good man only because he is white, Christian, and, quote, wouldn't hurt a lady. She is blind to the fact that he's a killer, even after he's killed her entire family. In The Great Gatsby, you see this because to himself and those around him, Gatsby's image of wealth and success hides the reality of his feelings of dislocation and emptiness. For what you see is all there is. In the autobiography of Malcolm X, that book epitomizes what you see is all there is. In Malcolm's youth, when his self-image and sense of success are based on what he sees around him, crime and a denigrating emulation of white power, even painfully straightening his hair to disguise his true identity. See what you can come up with for your subject matter. This is not something instantaneous, clearly, but food for thought. This is the book, Thinking Fast and Slow. I highly recommend it to all of you. This was just a very, very brief overview of these ideas. I know I threw a lot at you. I'm certainly very interested to hear what questions you have, and let's get started with that right away. Kelsey.
Thank you so much, Drew. So we are going to open up the Q&A. So anybody that has any questions for Drew, please put them in the Q&A now, and I'll give everybody a few minutes. Drew, I do have our first question. How can students be inspired to use higher order thinking?
Well, the first thing I talk about with my students is how important this is. This is the essence of my teaching. And so I would say, first, express to them how important this is, not just in this class, not just in school, but learning how to think better is going to be something they can use throughout their lives. So that's number one. Be clear about it, be direct about it, put it on the table for them. You might find that to really bring the issue to life, you might want to use some of what I put into this presentation, and you'll find it in the book. The visual images, perhaps, are the most accessible and the most remarkable because, as I said, even when you know what you're seeing is inaccurate, you can't help but still see it that way. And this shows to you the power of System 1 and how important it is to, you've got to be intuitive, you've got to be creative. You want that aspect of your inner self, but you also don't want to give in to errors of thinking, errors of judgment. And you always want to be vigilant in knowing, and your lessons and your assessments should focus, I think, on tasks that need system 2. That's why I, for example, never give multiple choice or fill in the blank kinds of assessments. I always want to give open-ended types of assessments. And I let my students know that their life experience, their personal connection is just as valuable, even if people have always told them they're a terrible English student and they've gotten D's their whole life. Well, forget that, because if you make the effort to bring your personal experience and your perspective to bear on a work of literature, on a prompt, to think deeply about it, that is fantastic. And I have had many experiences where such students have more powerful insights into a book from a thematic standpoint than students who have been getting straight A's and are used to thinking that they know everything and often can be more superficial in their judgments. So that's my first advice on that.
Thank you, Drew. Our next question is, how open to these ideas are your students? Do they want to acknowledge bias?
Well, you know for yourself, and all the people that you know, and the people you observe in the country and the world, very few people like to acknowledge their biases. And it's hard to accept that cognitive strain is a good thing. Most people are cognitively lazy, as system 2 is lazy itself. And to feel good about something means to feel relaxed and to feel right and to feel intuitive. And all that, we're so used to functioning that way that I understand why you're posing the question. But I think the key there is to let students know that they all have a system 2. It's in there. It's just often not utilized very much. And this is the key to better thinking, slow thinking, analysis. I teach seniors, so analysis is everything in the world of interpreting literature. But in your own life, snap judgments, we had that whole book, Blink, by Malcolm Gladwell, but I presented to you here how snap judgments can be valuable, but they can also be error prone. And if you want to think deeply about something, you need to use system 2. So you're all students are capable of it. All people are capable of it. Most people are not used to using it very much. And once you let students know that they have this capability, it's in them, and it can open up an entirely new world of analysis and thought and experience. And then you require it in the prompts that you give them, you'll find it happening more and more in your classes.
Thank you, Drew. Our last question is, do you have an example that I could use in a math class?
Well, sure. I think you could use the example that we have in the presentation of 17 times 24, unless you have a real math whiz, and as a math teacher, maybe you knew it right away, but most people don't. And I would have to visualize it as if I was visualizing it on a board, and I'd have to work out the problem. And I'm using system 2, both in the visualization and in the working of it out. So that to me is the first step. And then beyond that, you can then, and I think you're probably doing this already, you're relating the formulas to real world examples, because we're all trying to make what's being called authentic assessments. And authentic means, in essence, that students feel they're relevant in some way to their life experience. And so you put it in a narrative context where they're using the formula, but they're working out a problem that might not seem as evident once you think deeply about it, right? So that could involve some of the statistical examples that I gave, where a bias might lead you to think one thing, but then you realize, oh, wait a minute, if I think about it for a second, this is a much larger statistical field than that one, therefore, et cetera, as you saw in the presentation. So those are just a couple of things that come to mind for me. And I know that would help me in a math class, because that certainly is not where my mind goes, either system 1 or system 2 intuitively. I'm sorry that has to be the last question. I'd certainly be willing, if any people want to stick around. I don't know what your schedule is, Kelsey, but I'm happy to hang around longer if that's possible.
Yeah, I'm happy to hang here if anybody has any other questions for Drew.
Well, if we don't have any more, thank you so much for joining. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you get thinking fast and slow. Oh, I see one more question popped in there. Do you see it, Kelsey?
Yep. Do you think COVID made cognitive biases more common?
Well, there's a lot of evidence already from many studies that many students had a great deal of trouble with remote learning and lost a lot of ground in every aspect of their education with that. So I would imagine all of the negative aspects of System 1 were reinforced, and the positive attributes of System 2 were lessened, were weakened. So we do have a task of rebuilding that. In fact, just to share with you, and I've let my colleagues know, I am, for the most part, going to go back to pen and paper assignments. The origin of that is because of the frustrations of ChatGPT and AI. I know a lot of teachers are on the other spectrum of this and want to engage it and involve it in their lessons because it's here to stay and we're not going to do without it. But for now, I do find that eliminating the phones, I'm also going to, I bought a phone locker to lock away that crack-like addiction for my students. And at least in my classroom, then they're going to put away that distraction. They're going to write their thoughts down in class in paper and share them that way. And even if if it's a collaborative assessment, they'll work with each other that way so that I can focus on their System 2 analysis and not give in to, at least not yet, not give in to the very powerful and pervasive distractions of the internet. I have always had the image, the nightmarish image, that in the not too far distant future, students are going to come into class and they're going to plug a cable into a port in their heads, and that's how they're going to get education. They obviously don't even have to be in class for that. But I'm going to do whatever I can to stave that off, because AI, most people, most students, and in the end, most people will be very, very happy to just live on a system one level and let AI do their thinking and their judging for them. And that is maybe devolution. We'll be experiencing devolution of the species. And I want to resist that. I want to go back to that 60s slogan, fight against the machine. So that's what I'm going to try to do.
Well, thank you, Drew. We have one more question.
Okay.
Becky said, interesting to go back to paper assignments. What are your thoughts on processing and reading paper copies versus digital copies?
Well, it's going to be more work. First of all, it's more work because of the lousy penmanship of most students. But it's also going to be more work because I used to have all assignments put into Turnitin, which, does have an AI generator and now a detector, it says, but there's lots of caveats to that. And that did make my grading easier. But I'm opting to put a strain on my own pedagogy here in the service of trying to focus on higher order thinking. And higher order thinking is system 2 thinking, and informed by system 1. I'm not castigating system 1, but I'm trying to invigorate and enrich system 2 and students' access to it, which begins with awareness of it, and that they all have that capability. I hope that answered your question.
I think that was a great answer. And I think we are going to wrap it up for the day. I don't see any other questions coming in.
Well, thank everybody so much, everybody, for joining in. And I hope you get a lot out of Thinking Fast and Slow and the inspiration that Daniel Kahneman, who won a Nobel Prize, by the way, in economics, can give you. Good luck out there.
Well, thank you, Drew, and thank you all for attending today. We will be emailing you a link to view the recording of this webinar once it's available. If you or any of your fellow instructors are interested in presenting for our Learning and Growing webinar series, please submit your proposals to the Learning and Growing website, which I am linking in the chat right now. And these free webinars are brought to you by Hawks Learning, an innovative educational courseware company. To learn more about our mastery-based course materials and how Hawks can enhance learning outcomes for you and your students, please visit www.hawkslearning.com. I hope everyone has a great rest of the day, and thank you for attending today's webinar. Thank you, Drew.
Thank you for your help.
Of course. Have a great day.